I'd like to talk to you today about the holiness of God from Psalm 99. This is a study from Lifeway's Bible Studies for Life. It's not produced or reviewed by Lifeway, but goes along with their series. And I encourage you to check out the many fine resources that they have online. But at any rate, we're going to talk about Psalm 99. As you look at an overview of this passage, you see we're in three different places in this passage. It says, He is holy, God is holy. And so I want to begin with a somewhat lengthy reading from a life-changing book, and that is The Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul. And this is the beginning section of that book. I was compelled to leave the room. A dark, undeniable summons disturbed my sleep. Something holy called out to me. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the clock on my desk. It seemed vague and unreal, as if I were in a chamber submerged under fathoms of water. I had reached the beginning edge of slumber, where the line between consciousness and unconsciousness is blurred. I was suspended in that moment when one hangs precariously on the edge, a moment when sounds from the outside world still intrude on the quietness of one's brain. That moment just before surrender to the night occurs. Asleep, but not yet asleep, awake, but yet not fully alert, still vulnerable to the inner summons that said, Get up, get out of this room. The summons became stronger, more urgent, impossible to ignore. A burst of wakefulness made me jerk up upright and swing my legs over the side of the bed and onto the floor. Sleep vanished in an instant, and my body sprang into resolute action. Within seconds, I was dressed and on my way out of the college dormitory. A quick glance at the clock registered the time in my mind, 10 minutes before midnight. The night air was cold, turning the snow of the morning into a hard crusted blanket. Felt the crunch under my feet as I walked toward the center of the campus. The moon cast a ghostly pall on the college buildings, whose gutters were adorned with giant icicles, dripping water arrested in space. Solid daggers of ice that resembled frozen fangs. No human architect could design these gargoyles of nature. The gears of the clock atop Old Main Tower began to grind, and the arms met and embraced vertically. I heard the dull groan of the machinery a split second before the chimes began to ring. Four musical tones signaled the full hour. They were followed by the steady, sonorous striking of 12. I counted them in my mind, as I always did, checking for a possible error in the number, but they never missed. Exactly 12 strokes pealed from the tower, like an angry judge's gavel banging on metal. The chapel was in the shadow of Old Main Tower. The door was made of heavy oak with a Gothic arch. I swung it open and entered the narthex. The door fell shut behind me with a clanging sound that reverberated from the stone walls of the nave. The echo startled me. It was a strange contrast to the sounds of the daily chapel services, where the opening and closing of the doors were muffled by the sounds of students shuffling to their places. Now the sound of that door was amplified into the void of midnight. I waited for the moment in the narthex, allowing my eyes for a few seconds to adjust to the darkness. The faint glow of the moon seeped through the muted stained glass windows. I could make out the outline of the pews and the center aisle that led to the chancel steps. I felt the majesty and the sense of space ascended by the vaulted arches in the ceiling. They seemed to draw my soul upward, a sense of height that evoked a feeling of a giant hand reaching down to pick me up. I moved slowly and deliberately toward the chancel steps. The sound of my shoes against the stone floor evoked terror filled images of German soldiers marching in hobnail boots along cobblestone streets. Each step resounded down the center aisle as I reached the carpet covered chancel. There, I sank to my knees. I had reached my destination. I was already there to meet the source of summons that had disturbed my rest. I was in a posture of prayer, but I had nothing to say. I knelt there quietly, allowing the sense of the presence of the Holy God to fill me. The beat of my heart was telltale, a thump, thump, thump against my chest. An icy chill started at the base of my spine and crept up to my neck. Fear swept over me. I fought the impulse to run from the forbidding presence that gripped me. The terror passed, but it soon was followed by another wave. This wave was different. It was a flooding of my soul of unspeakable peace, peace that brought instant rest and repose to my troubled spirit. At once I was comfortable. I wanted to linger there. I wanted to stay, to say nothing, to do nothing, simply to bask in the presence of God. That moment was life transforming. Something deep in my soul was being settled once for all. From that moment, there could be no turning back. There would be no erasure from the indelible imprint of its power. I was alone with God, a holy God, an awesome God, a God who could fill me with terror in one second and with peace in the next. I knew that in that hour that I had tasted the Holy Grail. I knew thirst was born within me that could never be fully satisfied in this world. I resolved to learn more, to pursue this God who lived in dark Gothic cathedrals and who invaded my dormitory room to rouse me from my complacent slumber. That bit of prose has stuck with me all these years and forever changed my life as I felt like I looked over the shoulder of R.C. Sproul and looked into the holiness of God. And I'm curious to ask you, I wonder if you've ever had an experience like that. If you had, I'd be curious to know. I'd be curious for you to write that up and copy and paste that into the comments below. I'd be very curious to know if you've ever had an experience like that. And I believe the writer of Psalm 99 had a day like that, had an experience like that when he wrote these words. The Lord reigns, let the nations tremble. He sits enthroned above the cherubim, let the earth shake. Great is the Lord in Zion, he is exalted over all the nations. Let them praise you, your great and awesome name. He is holy. The king is mighty, he loves justice. You have established equity. In Jacob you have done what is just and what is right. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. And he says it again, he is holy. Moses and Aaron were among his priests, Samuel among those who called on his name. They called on the Lord, and he answered them. He spoke to them from the pillar of cloud. They kept his statutes and the decrees he gave them. Lord our God, you answered them. You were to Israel a forgiving God, though you punished their misdeeds. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. 5 observations from this passage, and the first one is this experience of the holy. This experience of the holy that R.C. Sproul had, that I believe the writer of Psalm 99 had, this experience of the holy is not something you do. It is something that happens to you. When he writes, the Lord reigns, let the nations tremble. He sits in thrones between the cherubim, let the earth shake. You can't force yourself to tremble. You can't force yourself to shake. You can't force yourself to have this kind of feeling. It is something that God does to us. It's the experience that Isaiah had in Isaiah 6 in the year that King Uzziah died. Uzziah had been the king for 50 or so years and one of the few good kings of Israel or Judah. I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on the throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their face, with 2 wings they covered their feet, and 2 they were flying. And they're calling to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. And I cried out, woe to me! I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. I believe this experience of the holy was something that John had in Revelation 2, where he says, after this, I looked up and there before me was a door standing open. What does a door standing open suggest? It suggests, come on in. There's a door standing open in heaven. You can't manufacture this. You can't create this. You can respond to this. There is a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had heard at first, speaking to me like a trumpet, said, come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this. And at once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And if there's one verse that I've quoted 1,000 times to myself over the years, it's this verse right here, and that is, there is a throne in heaven. And someone, and I want to put it as a capital someone is sitting on that throne. And when you have that experience, it changes you. You cannot force yourself to have that experience. But if you are ever blessed to have that experience, I had that experience in part by looking over the shoulder of R.C. Sproul into his experience, into the holiness of God. And my prayer is that you will long for and seek to have that experience. Because the balancing truth is this: it's a little bit like falling asleep. You can't force yourself to fall asleep, you can't will yourself to fall asleep. What you can do is lay down. What you can do is turn off the lights. What you can do is turn down the noise. What you can do is try to relax your soul. And in a similar way, we can seek God and pray that God shows up and shows us His holiness. But what I want to say up front is you cannot force yourself to have this experience. C.S. Lewis describes a man who had such an experience in this passage here. He says, "In a way, I quite understand why some people are put off by theology. I remember once when I had given a talk to the RAF, Royal Air Force, an old, hard-bitten, and I get the impression non-churched, hard-bitten officer got up and said, 'I have no use for all that stuff. I have no use for all that theology. But mind you, even though I have no use for all that theology, I am a religious man too.' And he describes this experience. I know that there is a God. I felt him out there alone at the desert at night, the tremendous mystery. And that's why I don't believe in all your little dogmas and the formulas you have about him. To anyone who's met the real thing, to anyone who has had the experience of the holy, they all seem pretty petty and pedantic. And C.S. Lewis goes on to describe why we ought to study theology, that there is something real about that experience, and we ought to long for it. We ought to bask in that experience. But we ought to study theology as well, as he goes on to describe that book. But what I want to just point out is that here is a man, and I get the impression somewhat of an unchurched man, that out in the desert had this unbidden experience of the holiness of God. Observation number 2, it is something that our soul longs for. That is why the psalmist said, "Let the nations tremble. Let the nations experience that." He sits on the enthroned between the cherubim. Let the earth shake. Everyone ought to have this experience. C.S. Lewis says, "I had not noticed either that just as men spontaneously praise, tell others about whatever they value, so they spontaneously urge, as the psalmist is doing, us to join them in praising it. Isn't she lovely? Wasn't it glorious? Don't you think that magnificent?" Anytime you watch a great movie, you invariably go out and tell people, "You got to see this movie." If you watch a great show on TV, you are invariably motivated to tell your friends, "Man, you got to watch this TV show." If you read a great book, you're invariably motivated to tell people, "You got to read this book." There is something about experiencing something. And what we want to say in this context is there's something about experiencing the holiness of God that satisfied us and makes us want to tell everyone within earshot about it. The psalmist, and certainly in Psalm 99, the psalmist, in telling everyone to praise God, are doing what all men do when they speak of what they care about. My whole and more general difficulty about the praise of God. In the greater context, he's talking about, he thought God maybe was a little bit egotistical, but he says, my difficulty with the thought of God needing praise depended on my absurdly denying to us, as regards to the supremely valuable, what we delight to do, and what we indeed cannot help but doing about everything that we value. I think we delight to praise what we enjoy because the praise not merely expresses that joy, but completes the enjoyment. It is the appointed consummation. It is not out of compliment that lovers keep on telling one another how beautiful they are. The delight is incomplete until it is expressed. And we have great delight in experiencing the holiness of God, and that great delight is incomplete until it is expressed. So what the psalmist wanted to do in Psalm 42, as the deer pants for the streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Where can I go and meet with God? My soul yearns, even faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water. We thirst for such an experience. But wait, there's more. We not only thirst for such an experience, we also want to run from such an experience. In Isaiah, we read where Isaiah said, "Woe to me," I cried. "I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." And I thought I was just fine up till now. But when I saw the holiness of God, I realized sinfulness of my sin. It's what Peter was feeling on the side of the lake there when they had this great catch of fish, and he realized that Jesus was no ordinary man. And he fell at Jesus' knees and he said, "Get away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." To state this a different way, two other balancing truth we could say is, it is something that satisfied, and it is also something that make you thirst for more. I will be fully satisfied, as with the riches of food. With singing lips, my mouth will praise you. J.I. Packer talks about a man like this. He said, I walked in the sunshine with a scholar who had effectively forfeited his prospects of academic advancement by clashing with the church dignitaries over the gospel of grace. So he gave up a promotion because of some of his points of theology. But he said it doesn't matter, for I have known God. I think he's saying I have experienced the holiness of God. And that experience of the holiness of God has so satisfied me that nothing else matters. The remark was a mere parenthesis, a passing comment on something I had said, but it struck with me and set me to thinking about the value of experiencing the holiness of God. The last observation about this passage, that if you ever have the awesome privilege of experiencing the presence of God, you will forever be changed. And in the biography of R.C. Sproul, we read these words. This is from R.C. Sproul, so the author is quoting Sproul here. If you think back over your life, you will be able to identify, I'm sure, a handful of crisis experiences, crisis moments that forever afterwards change the course of your life. And again, if you've had one of those, I'd be curious for you to tell me about it and put those in the comments below. When I think over my own life, I always go back to a moment, the year that we described in just a moment ago, 1958, that took place in the dead of winter during my years in college. I had been a Christian for a little over a year, and my conversion to Christ was, up until that evening, obviously the most dramatic change to that point in my life. I had fallen in love with Jesus, and my life had been turned upside down. My friends thought that I had lost my mind. They couldn't get over this transformation and concern that had marked my personality. I was obsessed with learning the Bible in that first year. But that night in the chapel, I had a sudden epiphany of grandeur, of the otherness. It's fundamentally what the word holiness means, the otherness of the majesty of God. What happened to me was almost like a second conversion experience for me. I had gone through this conversion to Christ. I had fallen in love with Jesus, the second person of the Trinity. But on this occasion, I suddenly had a whole new understanding of the character of God the Father. I knew in that hour that I had tasted the Holy Grail. Within me was born a new thirst that could never be fully satisfied in this world. And my prayer for you and the desire of my heart is that we would be blessed with that experience of God revealing himself to us. Now, I've designed this video to either watch on YouTube by yourself or to watch it in a group. And if you're watching in the group, I provide some questions for you. And may God richly bless you as you discuss your experience, that you discuss your experience of experiencing the holiness of God.